quickly because we're going to talk about some interesting pieces. Some of you have turned in the assignment. I know it's not due now until tonight because I moved the date up because I really thought the Chiefs were, for the first time in my lifetime, going to make it into the Super Bowl. And I was sad and disappointed. I'm not sure I can be a Chiefs fan for yet another year. So, but no, they had a good game. Sorry for you, Liam. Why you don't like the Patriots? So, my wife is a die-hard Redskins fan, so there's no love lost. So, let's talk about use cases. So, some of your projects are in. A couple of them I've added comments. I know at least one group is having a meeting on their project today. Get those into me as soon as possible. If I can, if there's an issue or something odd on them, we can start to readdress and take a look at that. So I've got a couple of really interesting ideas and some good ones in there that we can kind of tweak and tailor. So we want to talk about some more tools that we can use in that. And really this week, we want to look at this idea of what a use case is. What these ideas, how do we create them? What are they? How do I break them down? And so in the chapter, there's a couple of items. There's a couple of videos from our author, but I want to look at them from the standpoint of our project. And so we're going to look at some of the same ideas, but instead of the RMO outline, we're going to talk about them in terms of some of our projects. So there is an assignment, and because I love the idea of getting a ticket, there's actually one that involves a ticket for your. So that user story. So user stories lead to how we're going to start breaking apart this system. And so these are some questions you can even think about as you're working with your business, because you're really saying, I want to do what with this system, with this company, with this organization? What do I want to accomplish? And that can lead to finding out what they really want to do. Because they're not going to come out in most cases and they're not going to say, hey, I want an ERP software that will do accounting for me. They're going to say, I want to somehow make my payroll easier. And so when I look at that, we can then start doing that translation. So what do they want to accomplish? And so sometimes that goal, we have to break that up a little bit for them. But thinking about that, when you walk into that business, you say, what is your goal for this organization, for this business? What can we do? So we start with that idea of this user story, because that users, and they're part of the stakeholder group, obviously, and we know that they want to do things. So here, for example, is one that's in there as an RMO. As a shipping clerk, I want to ship an order as accurately as possible as soon as the order details are available. So that gives us some details about what's happening. And if they say something like this, I want to ship orders as accurately as possible, my takeaway when they write something like this, and we hear that, there's a problem right now going on. Does that seem fair? When they say they want to do something, that generally means they're not doing it now. And a lot of times these users, these end users, the people that are actually interacting with whatever we're building, they realize that there is an issue. They know in some cases the best way to do that, but maybe for whatever reason they don't get buy-in when they ask their boss. So sometimes you're the intermediary. Or maybe they're afraid because their boss is one of those, I know everything, I'm going to tell you exactly how it is, we're going to work on things my way. And yet, think about the guy assembling wheels in the Model T factory. That CEO of Ford, Henry Ford, isn't probably the expert at putting those wheels together. And when Henry Ford tried to figure out how to make those things faster, he started watching what employees did and started asking. Now, he still treated people really badly in a lot of other ways, but getting that information came out of those end users. And so we've done these techniques over and over and over again. So a couple of things then on that user story. Well, in this particular case, it says, well, I want then to details must pop up on the screen. Maybe I don't have to go search for them. Because right now, maybe the system makes me search for details. I don't even know there's an order coming out until I'm getting yelled at from my boss that, hey, why didn't you get this order shipped out? That that it's got a portable device. Well, if I'm tied to that computer and I have to run halfway across the factory to look for something, there might be some time advantages. Maybe it's not indicating what's in stock. And I actually ran into a plumbing supply company that I attempted to do some work with, very similar to your project. Over the summer, they had contacted me, and they're a fairly successful plumbing outfit. They have, at least that I know of, 10 different plumbing trucks. They've got plumbers, HVAC techs. But the reality was, they're trying to put all these details into QuickBooks or some other software. They don't even really have an inventory. They don't know what they have. So if they need to say, hey, I need a right angle fitting for half-inch pipe, they had to walk out and see if they really had one, or if it maybe was where they thought it was. But they thought magically that this would all cure itself. And when we started going through the process of what it would actually take for them to implement an inventory system and how they would have to deal with it, they said, yeah, it's not really interesting to us. They also, though, what I discovered when I was in there, and where I thought they might bite off on some of it, was they had only really the owner and the owner's wife would actually do a lot of the pricing for jobs and bids. And in some cases, they were a year and a half out before they would invoice somebody. So do you think they had a collections problem? If you wait a year and a half, are some of these people now unemployed, or their situation changes, or I could have billed a year and a half later. I'm going to look at it and go, really? You should have billed me a lot earlier. I'm certainly not going to make it any rush to pay this bill. So they had a lot of other issues. The end users that were in there were eager, and they said, hey, we want to do these kinds of things. And they came up with, how do we do some of those pieces? But again, we didn't have that buy-in of all the stakeholders. So, but those user stories often tell the times and tell us what's going on inside of an organization. So that user stories can lead us then to start diagramming what we like to call use cases. So use cases are really simple. They're a verb and a noun. That's all they are. We're going to do something. So generally, we have some way we get there. And I have actually a video about decomposition in there. So make sure you go in and you watch the video of the decomposition. But what we're really trying to do is come up with something that the system, and that system is not just the computer system. Remember, it's all of that flows of information. So what we're really trying to do is come out with, I want to do a specific activity. And then we can start breaking it down into how we're going to do those specific activities. So I'm going to skip that and the event decomposition because I'm going to make you go out and find that. One thing I will state, because I didn't think the video explained it really, really well. So all of these kinds of events that we're going to look at, so we're going to try to have something happen. There's a couple of different ways they can happen, or what triggers them to happen. So external events, so something that happens external to our system. So in the case of a dress shop, somebody placing an order online would be an external event. A timed event, so monthly reports. So unfortunately in our state, you have to pay sales tax if you're a business and you're selling products. It's a horrible, evil process, right? Form 10?
Have to. Kidding. I just did last week.
Okay, so Trevor, you just scared me a little bit there, you know. At least you didn't use the phrase, only for non-cash sales, but we have to pay sales tax. In our state, they're triggered on a timed basis. So depending on your sales volume, you may have to pay yearly, you may have to pay quarterly, or you may have to pay monthly and submit reports. It's a temporal event. It happens with some kind of time. Maybe it's a bill payment. We're actually paying something. Something happens on a time basis. We get a report. And then there could be something else that happens inside of our system. So the classic example is that idea of inventory. Now, if we're not doing inventory, it's hard to realize that. But in a lot of cases, we have some kind of an inventory control. And so the best example of this I have, and maybe some of you guys have them, does anybody have an Amazon button for any of your items? Oh, you don't know about the replenishment buttons. So Amazon will sell you a little button. And in fact, on some products, they will give it away. So like toilet paper. Put the little button inside your cabinet where you store your toilet paper. You get down to a certain amount of toilet rolls, and you push the button, and Amazon automatically orders that for you. That's really great unless you have small children. So I have enough toilet paper to last until they graduate from high school. Those little buttons are a great idea. It's that idea of something happens, a trigger of some kind inside it. Businesses use those on inventory systems a lot. So some way that we get a reorder. So maybe you're running a hot dog stand and you have a reorder point of when you get down to 60 hot dogs, you make a new order. Sometimes those are a temporal event, though. If you only have a truck that comes by once a week, like our, I almost called it a restaurant, our cafeteria comes in, then that triggers that over and over again. I always like asking when I have prospective students, which I had one today, because they usually come visit my office after they eat our cafeteria. And campus is great. They enjoy the interactions with people. They go, "Huh? Did you have lunch? How was that?" And then the look changes. So we have all these internal and external triggers and different things that can. So we want to look at them. When do those things want to happen? So temporal events by time, some kind of a triggered event. So temporal events. So here they have a couple of them. Probably the most common thing that every business has is payroll. And I will tell you that as a system analyst, if you get in the way of somebody getting their paycheck, they will run all over you. One of the things we often do is schedule things around a payroll cycle because people want to be paid and we have to come up with things. So I got to work last summer on implementing a time management system at a company. We had to schedule some of those conversions so that people got paid on time. If you don't get paid on time and get your paycheck, most people are really cranky. And so I think about some of those federal employees right now not getting paychecks. They're not very happy. If you had to work and you didn't get a paycheck, you probably would be unhappy too. So make sure when you look at those kinds of things, yes, that's something I should note down. We have to. If you're paying things like the state or federal government and it's on a timed event, when you're doing changes to that system, make sure that you work around those. Now, it's not always possible to do things perfectly, but sometimes we use that idea of temporal events to shape how we're going to change things. So right now, kind of on the weird side, I'm doing some work with a police department implementing e-tickets. My hope is if I do that and I have a card that says I worked on this before, I will not get tickets. That's my hope. But some of that is based around the timing of FBI reports. Because FBI reports have to go in each month. And at the first of the month, they send in data about what happens in that police department. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of scary a little bit. So it's that idea of that temporal event drives some of these other activities. And so it certainly does in this case. So you may want to see what actually affects that. And so I kind of like this. This is kind of an interesting thing because we think about all these events and we do want to influence them. Now, what I love is that they show a failure at Sears. And I think that's appropriate because, well, unfortunately, Sears is now probably going to shut her down. They still have a few stores still open, but the death knell is sound. Last rites have been written.
They have an offer, $5.6 billion offer.
We'll see. It's very sad. Is that the one from Lampert who actually is the... Yeah. So, he was a guy who's already bled the company dry in the last multiple years. So. But think about this. So that customer thinks about buying a new shirt. That doesn't trigger anything in our inventory or in our sales system because we don't know about that process. But if you drive to the mall, nothing happens. Tries it on. Still nothing happening in our system. It's all the way to the point where they go to Walmart, they try it on, and until they actually buy that shirt or purchase it, that event affects our system. But this is different than online. So now picture that same scenario online. When does this event affect our system? Customer thinking about a shirt probably doesn't affect our system. But say we replace that drive to the mall, they went to our website. Can looking at that website affect our system? Are we able to do things online we aren't able to do on a brick and mortar? Yeah. Because once it affects our system, once they put in a little bit of data, even though they haven't bought it yet, they're now affecting our system. And maybe we launch a marketing campaign against them specifically. So there are some things that will happen a little differently, especially when you look at the online platforms. And some companies haven't yet figured out what happens. So here's an example where there's a lot of different things that happen. And some of this we think of, well, that's kind of weird. So customer requests a catalog, and he's calling to request a catalog. When's the last time you called to request a catalog? Never. How do we request a catalog? Oh, you don't. What? The reality is, do most places have catalogs anymore? No, it's all online. So some of this is changing, even as we speak here. There are companies, though, that like to send out catalogs. Gives you that physical, tangible piece. And I remember growing up, and maybe some of you did also, that they used to still have, at Christmas time, the Sears Wish Book. And every toy you could possibly imagine was in the Sears Wish Book. There are companies. Amazon came out with kind of a wish book this year. There are some that use them extensively because they found that people respond to that, or a group of categories that respond. So IKEA. You guys have all been to IKEA, I hope. If you haven't, you know what it is. IKEA, you can get a paper catalog. And it's interesting to thumb through because there's a lot of things wandering through the store you may or may not see. But where does this affect our system? Well, obviously at the beginning when he gets a catalog. Now, 2 weeks later, he's got the catalog. When he checks the item availability, he's looking at it in the catalog and he has to call in to place an order. That affects our system. If you change an order, and order changes can be pretty expensive, it affects our order. So, when they want to check, is my refund there? That affects our order, or affects our system. So anytime we interact directly with there, we're affecting something in our system. So this is hard to do, and I want to think about that in terms of your project. In your projects as you work, we want to assume perfect technology. Now, there's a place in our project where we'll assume technology all goes bad, but for now, when we're thinking about that system overall and what we want to do with it, we want to think about the world as ideal. Everything happens to work. So, user loss of password, those kinds of things we don't need to worry about at this design stage. When we're looking at the big picture of this system, those kinds of cases like, backing up data. What is the hardware in the back end? Now, as I say that, some of your projects may push this a little up, but we really want to think about a perfect system so that everything works. And maybe we're going to design such a perfect system that the technology doesn't even exist yet, and it'll take a while until we get there. So, hopefully we create then this idea of a use case. The use case is we are breaking down the system into what it does or what we hope it will do. So, a user does something. A user does something. So, look up a customer. Well, somebody looks up a customer. So, sales manager looks up a customer. So that is that idea of that use case. And so we start to try to figure out who is doing what and when. And so we start putting these pieces together. The use case, search for an item. So we have a user. So all of those people can actually be actors in there. So sometimes we have multiple different levels of actors. So searching for an item, it could be a salesman, it could be a manager, it could be a customer, It could be the inventory manager. All of those different people could be a user in that system. And they're all tying back to a system that we're going to use. Some of them are customer only. So only a customer can fill a shopping cart. Well, that makes sense. So we want to try to break that down. And all those activities that our system interacts with, we want to be able to look at. So maybe shipping. The customer doesn't ship, but the shipping department. Create a return. Well, the customer's the only one that can create a return, right? What about those items that are visibly damaged and we know about it? So the shipping manager or whoever's involved in that would be able to create a return also. And that way we can process that. Provide suggestions. See, this one I think is interesting because it says provide suggestions. But I think really all of your end users should be able to provide suggestions. Just a thought in there. Now, rating on products, we probably do want to limit that to that idea of just the customers providing rates. So update accounts. Well, the customer can update his own account. The service rep might be able to. The store sales. There's a lot of people that interact with that. So we're looking at how do we break these down. And then if we break down into some of these other systems, so here we have a marketing system. Well, obviously this is not a customer-driven event. It's going to be that marketing manager that has details or information or new products. And then we have that idea of how and who are able to do that. So the other thing you want to look through when you're working at this is who's going to verify that. Is it all internal to the marketing department? Is the reporting system, is that just management? Who else might be wanting to see that? So these give us a way that we can start to look at it. So this is my level of drawing skill right here. If I had a ruler and a square, and a stamp, I can draw this one. So what we're really trying to do, though, is show a couple of things that happen. So we want to say, here we have an actor. So in this case, it's a shipping clerk. And they do something. They ship an item. So the line just indicates they do something. This automation barrier or boundary shows where it becomes an automated part of our system. So at what steps are included inside that boundary and what steps are outside. The reality is, the more things I can do automated, the better off we are. Would it be great if I could eliminate that shipping clerk entirely? Yeah. If I could ship items and instead of a shipping clerk, I have a shipping robot, which Amazon is trying to work on, I eliminate a lot of those things that happen, including time, cost. Hopefully I improve accuracy. Now, there's always some weird off ones, but if we expand that a little bit, we have the similar idea then. So here we have a customer. Here we have a customer. Same idea. What happens in that automated system? Inside of our information systems, what happens? So search for an item, view comments. So now we're starting to see all the different things a customer can do, and we need to make sure we're accounting for all of those. So there have been systems that have built that really work really well, it seems like, and then you go, man, I put all these things in my shopping cart. The only way I can do it is delete the entire cart. And I've actually seen some online shopping sites like that where I couldn't modify a number of items in the account. I had to delete an item rather than reduce its number from 3 to 2. So by this way, now we can say, hey, we can break down those into all of the possible pieces we need. So our customer can do all of these items. Well, we know those items, some of them are shared. And so we can also look at it from the idea of the sales subsystem. So here's another idea. Still the same great stick figure drawings. But now we can see multiple users in there and what items they can interact with. So the customer service rep can create a phone sale, but the store sales rep creates a store sale. So there's some odd discrepancies in there. And some of the times this can also lead to the idea that maybe we can create cross-train people or change ideas. And So I actually threw up some diagrams very similar to this for a small city a couple of years ago. And we looked at, in this particular case, that small entity had a utilities employees and they had city employees. And they, quite frankly, they were in the same building, but you go into one door to go deal with your utility bill, you go in another door in a different area to go deal with if you wanted a building permit or a dog permit or any of other things that the city would deal with. And I looked at them, and we drew a diagram very similar to this. And that diagram showed how many items they really had in common, how many they could have in common, and that maybe what we really should do is change that modality. So it's a complete city's office dealing with utilities and city business. Those employees would be doing essentially the same thing, but we could do it with, guess what, fewer of them. And we're really always looking at that idea of how we can manage things. So this was a diagram we used, and then we essentially eliminated one side of it or combined it, however you want to look at it. And we made sure that those employees could do every item in there. Every time I go into this, I am going to use that idea of find all your stakeholders. Those missing stakeholders, those people you don't know about, will come back to bite you in the butt. And sometimes it can be your own personal pocketbook. So many, many years ago, I was working with a radio station on a project. We wanted to automate the radio station a little more. Because if you have this idea that radio stations sit around and they actually play a record like an old turntable, because you've been watching reruns of WKRP, that's not the way radio stations work anymore. Most of them are highly automated. They have music on a hard drive, or they subscribe to a satellite service and interject commercials and do some other things. So we were looking at, and one of the driving forces with that was it was a very small radio station. They had a lot of labor relative to the amount of income they had coming in. And one of the driving factors was Husker sporting events. If you're in radio in Nebraska, you pretty much have to carry Husker sporting events live. Things like the football game, if you don't know, they start broadcasting 12 hours or so before the game and about 12 hours after the game. They're still talking about it on various radio stations. The reality was this radio station needed to automate that. So they sent broadcast tones and things, so you didn't physically have to have somebody there for 20 hours straight or whatever crazy number it turned out to be. But they had not got to the point to do that yet. So we drew out how we were going to do it. Then I find out they have somebody who's got money involved in it. And they didn't want to put any money into the station. So the general manager slash owner slash wasn't the guy who actually was funding this. And it turned into kind of a debacle. Quite frankly, I ended up just eating, and I didn't have a ton of time and labor into it at this point, thank goodness. But it turned into the point where I finally said, you know what, I'm walking away, and I ate whatever was involved in that. Now at this point they have went, because they got bought up by several other stations, but it was that idea of I had to find out all the stakeholders, and I screwed up by not making sure up front that this guy I thought was the owner and I thought was the principal in terms of money wasn't. And that can certainly happen with a lot of these. So making sure that that's going to happen. I weirdly had a student a couple of years ago who did a project. He had some really great ideas, but one of the unknown stakeholders in this particular company was the bankruptcy court. Everything they did, they were doing whichever chapter it was, a reorganization and trying to stay liquid and still work. But any expenditures of funds, they really had to go through a bankruptcy. I don't know, there was a term for it. But they had to have all their purchases and everything approved, and it was quite frankly a lot of extra on top of that. They didn't want to spend any money, quite frankly. So it was an interesting project and another one of those learning things. So it's that idea of find all those stakeholders. Figure out who's invested in this, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional. So there's a lot of details in this chapter. So make sure that you read those chapters and you look at those details. You look at how do I break things down into this idea of use cases? Because I will expect the idea of use cases in your project. That was my subtle piece of it. Because that's an easy way. We use them all the time. break it down into that idea of customer service rep does, I do, owner does, customer does. You're trying to break that apart and try to figure out what's really going on inside of this system. And sometimes it will reveal things that are a little frightening and a little scary. So this chapter is actually pretty easy. We are going to close that, but I did. I guess life will go on. So this week, as I start to review those and your suggestions and your submissions, so there's a couple of things this week. So notice there are video decomposition and user case diagrams. Those are actually from the author of the book. I have an assignment here, the State Patrol and tickets. And I know everybody in here is well aware of tickets, right? Never? Some of you have never gotten a ticket. I don't buy that, Liam. Yeah. So,
The following two courses.
you did a stop class to get rid of that? So this will give you a little insight into the State Patrol, at least in a use case. You can start to see what something would look like. Now, are tickets fun to talk about? They're okay to talk about. They're less fun to receive. So unfortunately, my last ticket, I didn't turn it in time to try to sign up for the online stop class. So I can only imagine what my insurance will be. I am a scofflaw driving 43 in a 35, leaving Franklin, Nebraska. My Prius is such a horrible thing on the road. Make sure you do that assignment. There is those two videos. There is also a discussion board. But what I also put up here, and if you looked ahead, you might have found this. So here is a piece of part 2 of your project. So a sample from another user, another student. So this particular individual looked at telecom expenses at Sac Federal Credit Union, and they started working on this project. Again, real world. They implemented a system based on this report and how they worked with it. So, now, thankfully this was a few years ago, but they used a Microsoft Access database for production environment. That sounds like a great idea. But wait, you guys didn't have me for database, so you didn't hear my rantings about how bad Microsoft Access is. So this is a sample of a piece of one. So part 2 and what they did, and that's not the entire project, because this one got very, very involved. This student was the A+ overachiever. This project, by the time it was done and she submitted it, and it had some specific tweaks for the Federal Credit Union, this project ran well over 100 pages of length by the time she was done. But the flip side of that is she was also involved working with this company, and I let her do it. So as part of her, she got to use some of her time at work also to do it. So there was a dual sword in that one. So here is what they had found, and so notice they've got a lot of data. So this maybe will help you out when you start working on part 2. So I'm saying part 2, and you're right, it's not due yet. Yeah. I would love it if you guys started working immediately as soon as we got part 1, and I gave you some comments and feedback on that. That way we don't get behind, because behind is a bad place to be. All right. So there also is a discussion board this week, and I think at least one person has posted on that. So make sure you utilize the discussion boards. So most of you did. There was quite a bit of discussion about the mission statement. That mission statement, it doesn't seem that important when you just think about it, but the amount of time and effort companies spend to create and craft a mission statement, we're doing it right now at the college. And it will be hundreds and hundreds of hours of committees and meetings to figure out a new and improved mission statement. It really does. A mission statement stands out a little bit. Now, my idea of just we are here to serve your education needs is probably a little too broad. So make sure you do that. This one, actually, we talk a little bit about project management. I know everybody in here has taken project management. They loved it. They enjoyed it. And it's one of those skills that you'll see a lot of when you graduate and you're making that $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year job. All right, any questions over this right away? All right, so we will not have a video on Wednesday. Make sure you do watch the videos that are included in there. And I should be, hopefully, in the next couple of days, as soon as you turn in submissions, I will feed back as quickly as I